You have probably tried everything. You have been warm and then you have been cooler, hoping the temperature change would make them lean in. You have been expressive, laying your feelings out honestly, because vulnerability is supposed to be the bridge that connects two people who are struggling to reach each other. You have been patient, giving them space that stretched into days and then weeks, telling yourself that the distance was what they needed and that meeting the need would eventually produce the closeness you were starving for. You have been understanding, more understanding than the situation probably deserved, more understanding than most people would have managed, explaining their behavior to yourself with a compassion that you rarely extended to your own pain in the same situation. And none of it worked. Not consistently. Not in the sustained relationship-building way that you needed it to work. The warmth pulled them close and then sent them retreating. The vulnerability landed beautifully in one moment and terrified them in the next. The patience created space that they filled with more distance rather than with the approach you were hoping for. The understanding kept you in something long past the point where your own needs were being met. And through all of it, the question that nobody around you could adequately answer was the one that mattered most. Not what am I doing wrong, but why does nothing I do seem to produce the consistent, present, genuinely invested version of this person that I know exists underneath all the defense? The answer is not about what you are doing. It is about how you are communicating. And the difference between the two is everything. Before going any further, the foundation of this conversation needs to be honest in a specific way, because the title of this discussion uses the word obsessed, and that word requires careful handling before anything useful can be built on top of it. Obsession, in the context of an avoidant becoming deeply consistently drawn to you, is not the obsession of unhealthy fixation. It is not manufactured through psychological games or the strategic deployment of hot and cold behavior designed to keep someone perpetually destabilized. That version of obsession exists, and it is damaging to everyone involved, and it is emphatically not what this conversation is about. The obsession being discussed here is something closer to what happens when an avoidant encounters, possibly for the first time in their relational history, a person who communicates in a way that does not activate their defenses. Who creates, through a specific and learnable set of communication patterns, a relational environment that feels simultaneously safe enough to stay in and interesting enough to be drawn towards. Who manages, through the quality of their presence and the nature of how they express themselves, to slip past the walls without triggering the alarm systems that those walls were designed to protect. That kind of obsession is not unhealthy. It is what secure attraction looks like when it operates within the specific and unusual context of avoidant attachment. It is the avoidant's nervous system finally finding a relational experience it does not need to flee from. And the communication style that produces it is not a manipulation. It is a mastery, a deep psychologically informed mastery of how to be present with another person in a way that honors both your own integrity and their specific emotional architecture. The first and most foundational element of the communication style that makes avoidance deeply, sustainably drawn to you is something that sounds deceptively simple and is in practice one of the hardest things to actually do consistently. You stop communicating your need for them and start communicating your experience of them. These two things sound similar. They are not similar. They are fundamentally, consequentially different in the way they land in an avoidance nervous system. And understanding the difference is the beginning of everything else. Communicating your need sounds like this, in its many variations. I need you to be more present. I need more consistency from you. I need you to tell me how you feel. Even when these statements are entirely legitimate, and they are the honest expression of genuine and reasonable relational needs, they land in an avoidance interior world as pressure, as demand, as the specific variety of emotional weight that their nervous system was built to treat as a threat. Not because your needs are wrong, because their attachment system translates need directed at them as the precursor to the suffocation or the loss or the conditional love that their early experiences taught them to expect. The moment they feel your need as pressure, the walls go up. The distance mechanism activates. The withdrawal begins, sometimes visibly, sometimes in the subtle, internal way of someone who is still physically present, but emotionally has already left the room. And you are left wondering why your honesty, which was supposed to build the bridge, seems instead to have widened the gap. Communicating your experience sounds like this. Being around you makes me feel more alive than I have in a long time. I notice I think about our last conversation for days afterward, There is something about the way you see things that I have not encountered in anyone else. These statements are not demands. They do not point toward the other person with the weight of expectation. They simply describe an internal experience, your internal experience, and offer it as information rather than as a claim being made on the other person's behavior or emotional output. The difference in how these land in an avoidance system is profound. The experience-based communication does not activate the defense. It does not register as a demand to be managed, or a need to be met, or a suffocating weight of expectation pressing toward them. It registers as something interesting, something that produces a faint, unfamiliar, quietly compelling sensation of being genuinely seen and genuinely desired, without being cornered by either. The second element is what might be called the art of the incomplete sentence, and it is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of communicating effectively with an avoidant, because it runs directly against everything that healthy communication in secure relationships recommends. In secure relational dynamics, complete, clear, emotionally thorough communication is the gold standard. Say what you mean, finish the thought, leave no ambiguity about your feelings or your needs or your position. This is genuinely good advice for secure attachment dynamics. It builds trust. It prevents misunderstanding. It creates the clarity that stable relationships require. With avoidance, complete emotional sentences can function as a form of closing, of foreclosing. When everything is said, when the feeling is fully expressed and the need is clearly articulated and the communication is emotionally thorough, the avoidant has nowhere to go with it except toward or away. And when toward means accepting the full weight of what was expressed, when it means meeting the emotional completeness with equivalent emotional completeness of their own, the fear activates, the defense responds. And away becomes the path of least resistance. The incomplete sentence leaves space. Not manipulative space, not the calculated withholding of information designed to produce anxiety. Genuinely open space. The kind that invites rather than demands. The kind that says, there is more here if you want to come find it, rather than here is everything, now respond accordingly. It might sound like beginning a thought and allowing it to trail into comfortable silence, or sharing something personal and then genuinely turning attention outward, rather than waiting in the charged atmosphere of someone who needs a specific response. Or expressing something warm and then moving naturally to another topic, without the hovering quality of someone who said something vulnerable and is now monitoring the landing. The incompleteness communicates confidence. It says I can offer this and also not need a particular response to it. And that confidence, the specific unperformable confidence of someone who can share without requiring, is one of the most attractive qualities an avoidance nervous system ever encounters, because it is the opposite of the emotional urgency that their defenses were built to manage. The third element of this communication style is the most psychologically sophisticated, and it is the one that tends to produce the deepest, most lasting drawn-in quality in an avoidant who encounters it. It is the practice of naming what is happening between you without assigning it meaning that requires them to respond. Avoidants are acutely, almost uncomfortably aware of the emotional atmosphere of their relational environment. This is one of the lesser-known facts about their psychology, because they appear on the surface to be people who are not particularly emotionally attuned, who miss or ignore or dismiss emotional signals that other people pick up easily. But the appearance is deceiving. Avoidants are often extraordinarily sensitive to emotional atmosphere. Their apparent unawareness is not absence of perception. It is the management of perception. They notice everything. They simply learned, early and thoroughly, not to respond to everything they notice, because responding meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant danger. When you name what is happening between you, the quality of a moment, the specific atmosphere of a particular conversation, the thing that is present in a silence that you are both sitting in, you reach that acute perception directly. You speak to the part of them that is already aware. And when you do it without attaching meaning that demands a response, without using the naming as a vector for your own need, without converting the observation into pressure, you create something they have almost never experienced in a relational context. Being known without being cornered. It sounds like this. There is something between us that I notice and enjoy, and am not in a rush to define. Or simply, there is something very comfortable about being quiet with you, or acknowledging a charged moment between you without immediately converting the charge into a conversation about what it means and where it is going, and whether they feel it too. The naming without the meaning assignment says, I see what is here and I am not afraid of it, and I am not going to use it against you. And for an avoidant whose relational history is full of moments where being seen led immediately to being claimed, being named without being cornered, is the experience of safety and desire arriving simultaneously, which is for their nervous system something close to revolutionary. The fourth element is the one that most people in dynamics with avoidance find the hardest to embody genuinely, because it requires something that the dynamic itself tends to erode over time. It is the communication of a full, rich, self-directed life, not performed, not strategically displayed, actually lived and naturally referenced. The communication that makes avoidance deeply drawn to someone is never communication that positions the other person as the center of gravity of one's emotional world. Not because avoidants are not worth centering, but because centering them communicates, at the level their nervous system is always reading, that your happiness is contingent on their behavior. And contingent happiness, for an avoidant, is one of the most activating experiences available. It tells them that you need them to show up in specific ways in order to be okay. And their history with needing people and with being needed has taught them that this arrangement always eventually produces the suffocation or the disappointment they are organized to flee from. The person who communicates a full life, who references their own projects, their own pleasures, their own developing inner world with genuine enthusiasm, and without the performing quality of someone who is strategically demonstrating their independence, is communicating something the avoidance nervous system registers as safe, as someone whose okayness is not dependent on the avoidance performance, as someone who can be left when the avoidant needs space without the leaving producing a crisis that will require emotional management upon return. This communicates freedom, and freedom, the specific freedom of knowing that closeness does not mean entrapment, that presence does not mean obligation, that connection does not mean the loss of self, is the condition under which avoidant desire most naturally and most sustainably grows. The fifth element is about the specific quality of curiosity, and it matters because avoidants, who are accustomed to being analyzed and diagnosed and patiently explained to themselves by people who have done enough reading to understand attachment theory, respond to genuine curiosity in a way that is entirely different from how they respond to understanding. Understanding, however well-intentioned, has a quality of conclusion about it, of having arrived somewhere, of having mapped the territory. When someone communicates, "I understand why you do this," even lovingly, even without judgment, the avoidant often experiences it as being reduced, as being made into a type rather than encountered as a specific, unrepeatable, continuously surprising person. The understanding, however accurate, closes something. Genuine curiosity opens. It communicates that you have not arrived anywhere, that the person in front of you continues to generate questions you do not yet have the answers to, that they are, to you, genuinely interesting rather than explained. And for someone who has spent their life managing the experience of being known, who has learned to keep people at the exact distance required to prevent full knowing, because full knowing has historically felt like full vulnerability, encountering someone who treats the knowing as a beginning rather than a destination is quietly disarming in ways they cannot entirely prepare for. The curiosity that draws avoidance in is not the clinical curiosity of someone gathering information about their patterns. It is the warm, specific, entirely genuine curiosity of someone who finds the particular texture of another person's mind genuinely fascinating, who asks questions that demonstrate they have been paying attention, who is interested in the unexpected detail, the unconventional opinion, the thing that reveals the specific and unrepeatable quality of who this person actually is beneath all the categories they might fit into. That quality of attention, specific, warm, undemanding, not organized around any particular destination, is one of the most powerful draws available in a relational dynamic. It creates, over time, the experience of being truly seen. And being truly seen, in the safety of an interaction that never uses the seeing as leverage, is the experience that makes an avoidance defenses lose their urgency. Not all at once, gradually, in the way that sustained, consistent warmth eventually warms even very cold things. The sixth element is the communication of standards. Not spoken standards, not declarations of what you require or deserve or will and will not accept, delivered as terms of engagement. Lived standards, the ones visible in how you treat yourself within the interaction, in what you do and do not engage with, in the specific quality of self-respect that is present in how you navigate the relationship. Avoidants are, as has been established, people whose nervous systems are exquisitely attuned to relational dynamics, even when their behavior suggests otherwise. They read the subtext of every interaction. They notice, whether or not they acknowledge it, the degree to which the person they are relating to holds themselves with dignity. The degree to which that person has a clear, unspoken but entirely evident sense of their own worth that does not require the avoidance validation to stay intact. When you communicate this through the natural, unstudied quality of someone who knows what they bring to an interaction and is not anxious about whether it is being adequately appreciated, something in the avoidance attraction system activates in a specific way. The activation is not the urgency of potential loss, though that is part of it. It is something more fundamental. It is the draw towards someone who cannot be easily dismissed, whose value is self-evident, who does not need to argue for their own worth because the worth is visible in every aspect of how they carry themselves. This is attractive to everyone, but it is specifically compelling to an avoidant whose relational history is often full of dynamics where their withdrawal was met with pursuit, where the distance they created was answered by someone closing it for them, where the implicit message of the dynamic was that their presence was worth chasing. When they encounter someone who does not chase, whose self-possession is real and evident and entirely unperformed, the relational script they are accustomed to running does not work. And in the disorientation of a script that does not work, something new becomes possible, something that looks, from the outside, remarkably like genuine interest. The seventh element is perhaps the most subtle and the most powerful, and it is the one that tends to produce the longest-lasting drawn-in quality when it is genuinely present. It is the communication of safety through consistency of self, not the consistency of behavior designed to demonstrate reliability. The consistent texting schedule, the consistent availability, the consistent emotional warmth deployed as evidence of trustworthiness. The consistency of being recognizably, steadily yourself across different moods and contexts and circumstances. Of having a self that does not reorganize around the avoidance emotional temperature. Of remaining essentially who you are, whether the interaction is warm or cool, close or distant, easy or charged. Avoidants are braced, at some level, for the person they are with to change in response to their distance, to become anxious or demanding or withdrawn or escalating, to become, in short, someone who requires management. This bracing is part of the fear that keeps them in perpetual low-level retreat, the expectation that closeness will eventually produce, in the other person, a kind of need that becomes overwhelming. When you remain consistently yourself, when the version of you that shows up after their withdrawal is recognizably the same version that showed up during the warmth, minus the adjustments made for self-protection, something in their nervous system does not know what to do with that information. Because the threat they were braced for did not materialize, the drama did not arrive, the escalation they were managing against did not come, and in that absence, in the quiet surprise of an interaction that did not follow the feared script, something relaxes, cautiously, incrementally, almost against their will. That relaxation is the foundation of genuine avoidant attachment, not the urgent, ignited passion of potential loss, though that is real, but the slower, deeper, more sustainable draw of a nervous system that has begun, carefully and against significant historical evidence, to associate your presence with the feeling of safety. And for an avoidant, safety and desire are not opposites. When the right conditions are present, when safety arrives without the loss of the charge that makes attraction alive, they become the most potent combination in the relational world. Safety and desire together, in the same person, in the same interaction. The thing their psychology has been telling them for their entire adult life does not exist. The eighth element is about repair, specifically about how you communicate when something goes wrong between you. Because something always goes wrong. In every relationship, in every dynamic, there are ruptures, moments of misunderstanding, moments where needs collide, moments where someone says something that lands wrong or does not say something that needed to be said. The rupture itself is not the differentiating factor. How you communicate through the repair of the rupture is. Most people, when a rupture occurs in a dynamic with an avoidant, communicate the rupture's impact in ways that inadvertently confirm the avoidant's deepest fear. They express the hurt with the full emotional weight of it, which the avoidance nervous system experiences as an attack requiring defense. Or they pursue the repair with an urgency that communicates anxiety, which the avoidant reads as the prelude to the suffocating need they are always expecting. Or they withdraw in a way that has a punishing quality, the charged silence, the demonstrative distance, which activates the avoidance shame and also paradoxically their relief, because distance is at least familiar. The communication style that makes avoidance deeply drawn to you handles rupture differently. It names the impact without maximizing it. It says something went wrong here without saying, and it means everything I feared about us. It communicates the need for repair without making the repair feel like a crisis. It holds the rupture lightly enough that working through it feels possible, and even, in a strange way, like evidence of the relationship's strength rather than a threat to its survival. This matters to an avoidant more than almost anything else in the communication dynamic, because their relational history has taught them that ruptures are dangerous. That conflict means the beginning of the end. That emotional difficulty between two people is a harbinger of the abandonment or the suffocation that they are always at some level expecting. When you communicate through rupture with a steadiness that says this is something we can navigate, rather than something that calls everything into question, you are directly, specifically counter-programming one of the most deeply grooved fears in their attachment system. Over time, this produces something remarkable. It produces the beginning of genuine trust, not the cautious, provisional, one-foot-out-the-door tolerance of someone who is managing their vulnerability. The actual, slowly building, experientially grounded trust of someone who has seen how you handle difficulty and has begun to believe, against significant psychological resistance, that difficulty handled this way might actually be survivable. The ninth element is about the relationship between your communication and your own emotional life, specifically about the degree to which your emotional life is visible to the avoidant without being delivered to them as their responsibility. This is a precise and important distinction. Avoidants need to know that you have an emotional life, that you feel deeply, that the connection between you matters to you. If you communicate none of your interior experience, if the self-possession tips into emotional opacity, you become interesting in a shallow way and safe in an ultimately unsatisfying way. The draw that eventually becomes something more than surface attraction requires the sense that there is real depth in you, real feeling, real stakes in the connection. But there is a difference between communicating that you have feelings and communicating that your feelings are the avoidance to manage. The first is attractive. The second is activating. The first says I am a full person with a rich interior life, and some of that life involves you. The second says my emotional state is contingent on your behavior and I need you to manage it accordingly. The communication style that produces deep, sustained avoidant interest is the one that makes the first visible, while never tipping into the second. It shares feeling as information rather than as demand. It expresses the interior life with the ease of someone who is not asking for anything specific in response. It allows the avoidant to see the depth of you, the realness of your feeling, the significance of the connection to you, without converting that visibility into pressure. This is genuinely difficult to do. It requires a level of emotional self-sufficiency that is not the same as emotional detachment. It requires being genuinely okay, not performing okay, not suppressing feeling to appear okay, but actually okay, in the fundamental baseline sense of someone whose sense of self and worth does not depend on the avoidance response in any given moment. And that genuine okayness, when it is real, is one of the most consistently compelling qualities a person can bring to a dynamic with an avoidant. The 10th element, and the one that ties all the others together into something coherent and livable and genuinely powerful, is this. The communication style that makes avoidance deeply and sustainably drawn to you is not a style you adopt in order to get something from them. It is a style you develop because it is the fullest, most honest, most self-respecting expression of who you actually are. Because it reflects a genuine understanding of yourself, of your own worth, your own needs, your own emotional life, that is solid enough to not require external validation to stay intact. Because it comes from a place in you that is not organized around the avoidance response or the relationship's outcome or the management of someone else's fear. Everything in this communication style, the experience over need, the open space, the curiosity, the lived standards, the consistency of self, the steady navigation of rupture, the visible but undemanding interior life, all of it is simply what becomes natural when you are genuinely fully, unhurriedly yourself in an interaction, when you are not trying to be enough, when you are not managing the distance between you, when you are simply present in the full and uncalibrated way of someone who knows that their presence is worth having and does not need the other person's behavior to confirm it. That quality, that specific, unperformable, cannot be faked quality of a person who is simply, completely themselves, is the thing that an avoidance defended, vigilant, perpetually scanning nervous system has almost never encountered. And encountering it does something to them that no technique, no strategy, no deployment of hot and cold, or urgency or availability, or any of the other approaches that people try when they are trying to reach an avoidant, can replicate. It makes them want to stay. Not out of urgency, not out of the activated desire of potential loss, out of something quieter and deeper and more sustainable. Out of the specific, rare, almost disbelieving experience of being in the presence of someone with whom the defenses feel, gradually and tentatively, less necessary. This is what you are building toward. Not the explosion of ignited passion, though that is real and available and part of the picture. The slower, more durable thing. The drawn-in quality of someone who keeps finding reasons to return, not because they are chasing something that is running away from them, but because the experience of being with you is the best available evidence they have encountered that closeness might not, after all, have to cost them everything. That evidence accumulates quietly, in conversations that leave them thinking for days, in interactions that did not go the way they feared, in moments of genuine connection that were not immediately followed by the weight of demand, in the gradually increasing frequency of their own impulse to reach towards you rather than away. It builds. It builds in the specific, patient, unglamorous way that real things always build, not in the charged peak moments, but in the ordinary accumulation of interactions that consistently failed to confirm the fear. That consistently delivered something different. That consistently offered the experience, modest and significant in equal measure, of being close to someone and finding that the closeness felt like expansion rather than entrapment. You are capable of offering that. Everything in this communication style is available to you, not as a technique you apply, but as an expression of the person you become when you stop trying to be enough for someone else and start being entirely unapologetically enough for yourself. That person, the one who communicates from fullness rather than from need, from self-knowledge rather than from anxiety, from genuine curiosity rather than from the desperate hope of being finally adequately understood, that person does not just draw avoidance in. That person draws everyone in, because that person is magnetic, in the way that only genuinely whole people are magnetic, not performing wholeness, not approximating it. Living it in the ordinary, specific daily way of someone who has done the honest work of understanding themselves and has arrived somewhere solid. Somewhere from which every conversation, every connection, every reaching toward another person is offered freely and received without desperation and held without the white-knuckled grip of someone who needs it to be something specific in order to be okay. That is the communication style. And it was never really about them. It was always, from the beginning, about you. And the thing about arriving somewhere solid, the thing about building the kind of internal foundation that makes this communication style not a performance but a natural expression of who you are, is that it does not happen in a straight line. It does not happen because you read the right things, or understood the right psychology, or finally cracked the code of someone else's attachment patterns. It happens the way all real internal shifts happen, slowly, non-linearly, through a series of ordinary moments that accumulate into something that one day you notice has changed without you being able to point to the exact moment it changed. You will have conversations that go beautifully, and conversations that go badly, and conversations where you can feel yourself slipping back into the old patterns. The reaching, the monitoring, the slight recalibration of yourself toward what you sense they need rather than what is actually true for you. And those slips are not failure, they are the evidence that the old grooves are still there, still carved into the neural pathways of someone who spends significant time organizing themselves around another person's emotional climate. The grooves do not disappear because you understood something new. They fade through repetition of a different choice, through the accumulated practice of catching the slip and returning, without drama or self-punishment, to the version of yourself that communicates from fullness rather than from the anxiety of not being enough. This is the part nobody talks about when they describe the communication style that draws people in, the maintenance of it. The daily, undramatic, unglamorous practice of staying in contact with your own interior rather than defaulting to the monitoring of theirs. It is not a destination you arrive at and then occupy permanently. It is a practice, a returning, a choosing again and again of the version of yourself that does not need the other person's response to know where it stands. There is something specific that happens to your communication when you are genuinely inside this practice rather than approximating it from the outside. something that is almost impossible to fake and entirely impossible to manufacture through technique alone. Your timing changes, not in the strategic sense of waiting a calculated number of hours before responding to a message. In the organic sense of someone who is not sitting with their phone in hand, nervous system activated, waiting for the next signal from the other person that tells them whether the dynamic is okay or not okay, safe or unsafe, moving toward or pulling away. When you are genuinely living from the inside of your own life, rather than from the outside of theirs, the pauses in communication become natural rather than performed. The responses arrive when you have something genuine to say, rather than when the anxiety of silence has become unbearable. The conversations have the rhythm of two people who are both actually living their lives, rather than the rhythm of one person living and another person waiting. This shift in timing communicates something that no specific words can communicate. It says, without saying, that you are not organized around them. That your days have their own texture and substance that does not depend on the quality of the most recent interaction between you. That you are reachable but not waiting, available but not hovering, interested but not consumed. For an avoidant whose nervous system is always scanning for the weight of another person's need pressing toward them, this particular quality of presence, genuine availability without the undertow of dependency, is experienced as a kind of relief, so unfamiliar it almost feels like suspicion at first. They keep waiting for the undertow, for the moment when the easy, undemanding quality of the connection reveals itself to be a setup for something heavier. And when the moment does not come, when interaction after interaction delivers the same spacious, uncluttered quality of someone who is simply there, simply themselves, simply enjoying the connection without requiring it to be more than it currently is, the suspicion gradually gives way to something else. Curiosity. The specific, quietly urgent curiosity of someone who has never encountered this particular relational experience before and finds themselves wanting, against their better judgment and all their historical conditioning, to understand it better. The curiosity an avoidant develops towards someone who communicates this way is worth examining in detail, because it is qualitatively different from the curiosity they feel, in dynamics that run on tension and pursuit. The curiosity produced by tension and pursuit is anxious at its root. It is organized around the question of what will happen next, whether the connection will hold, whether the other person's warmth is real or temporary. It has the driven, unsatisfied quality of something that feeds itself on uncertainty, and therefore can never be fully resolved. The curiosity that this communication style generates is different in its foundation. It is not anxious. It is genuinely interested. It is the curiosity of someone who has encountered a person they cannot fully predict it. Not because that person is being deliberately unpredictable, but because that person is genuinely complex, genuinely self-directed, genuinely operating from an interior life rich enough that each new interaction reveals something that the previous one did not. This is one of the most underappreciated aspects of what makes someone compelling to an avoidant over time. Not the mystery that is performed through withholding. The depth that is real because the person is genuinely deep. The unpredictability that comes not from strategic inconsistency, but from the natural, organic quality of someone who is actually living and growing and changing and discovering things about themselves and the world that they bring into the connection freshly. Without the staleness of someone whose entire inner life is organized around the relationship and therefore has nothing to offer that the relationship has not already consumed. When you are genuinely living, when your curiosity about the world is alive, when your interests are real and developing, when you are encountering ideas and experiences and challenges that are yours and not primarily defined by the dynamic between you and the avoidant, you bring something into every interaction that they did not expect and cannot fully anticipate. And that quality, that genuine freshness of a person who is actually elsewhere when they are not with you rather than simply waiting, is one of the most quietly magnetic things available in a human connection. There is a particular moment that tends to occur in the arc of an avoidant becoming genuinely drawn to someone who communicates this way. A moment that the avoidant often cannot identify as it is happening, but that, in retrospect, marks a significant internal shift. It is the moment they realize they have been thinking about you in your absence, not with the anxious circular quality of someone monitoring a dynamic, but with the simple, undemanding pleasure of someone who finds the thought of you genuinely enjoyable. Not thinking about what you might need from them, not thinking about the weight of the connection or what it asks of them, or how to manage the distance between closeness and safety. Simply thinking about you, about something you said that surprised them. about the specific quality of your attention in a particular moment, about a perspective you offered that they are still turning over in their mind days later, about the way the interaction left them feeling slightly more alive than before it happened. This quality of thought, uncomplicated, undemanding, simply pleasant in the way that thinking about something genuinely good is pleasant, is new for them in a relational context. Because most of their relational thinking has the weight of management in it, the processing of what is being asked of them, the calculation of what they can safely give, the monitoring of their own emotional temperature to ensure it has not risen to the level where the defense needs to activate. Thinking about you without any of that weight is an experience of relational pleasure that is, for someone with their history, genuinely rare. And rare things that feel good are precisely the things that avoidants find themselves returning to. Not with the desperate urgency of someone who cannot have what they want. With the quiet, considered, slightly wondering quality of someone who is beginning to understand that what they want might actually be available. That the thing they are being drawn toward might not in the end cost them what closeness has always cost before. Let us talk about what this communication style requires of you in the moments that are hardest. Not in the easy interactions, not in the conversations that flow naturally and leave you both feeling more connected. In the moments of real difficulty, the moments when the avoidance patterns reassert themselves and the withdrawal comes and the emotional temperature drops and everything in you that learned to read these signals as danger starts firing at once. Because the communication style being described here is not passive, it is not simply the absence of anxious, need-forward communication. In the hard moments, it requires something active and specific and genuinely demanding of your emotional resources. It requires the capacity to stay regulated in the presence of their dysregulation. To remain essentially yourself, warm but not collapsed, present but not chasing, clear but not cold, while their defensive patterns are doing everything those patterns were designed to do. This is where the work lives, not in the good moments. In the moments when your nervous system is responding to their withdrawal with its own activation, when the old learned responses are pulling you toward either pursuit or retaliatory distance, when the thing that feels most natural is also the thing most likely to confirm their fear and accelerate the retreat. In those moments, the communication that serves you and the connection is the communication that acknowledges what is happening without catastrophizing it, that names the shift without assigning it the weight of everything you fear it means. That says something feels different right now, and I notice it, and I am okay, in a tone that is genuinely grounded rather than carefully managed. That holds the moment lightly enough that there is room for it to change without requiring it to change on any particular timeline. This is not easy. It requires a level of emotional regulation that most people are still developing in the best of circumstances, let alone in the activated context of a dynamic, with someone whose patterns push directly on your attachment wounds. It requires, frankly, a significant amount of your own internal work, your own relationship with your own emotional responses, your own developing capacity to feel the activation and choose your response rather than simply being moved by it. That work is not work you do for them. It is work you do for every relationship you will ever have, for every version of yourself that will navigate difficulty with another person, for the quality of your own interior life. The fact that it also happens to be the exact quality of emotional presence that creates safety for an avoidant to move toward is a consequence, not the motivation. One of the most profound things that this communication style ultimately offers, to both of you, if the avoidant is genuinely doing their own work alongside you're doing yours, is a completely different template for what closeness feels like. Most avoidants carry, encoded at a cellular level, the equation that closeness equals loss of self. That intimacy requires the sacrifice of autonomy. That being genuinely known means being genuinely controlled or genuinely suffocated, or genuinely responsible for managing another person's emotional world in ways that leave no room for their own. This equation was not invented. It was learned from specific, real, formative experiences that taught it with enough repetition and enough pain to make it feel like truth rather than history. The communication style described throughout this conversation offers a different data point, a different lived experience of what closeness actually produces. Not the theoretical reassurance that closeness can be safe, not the words that say, "Trust me, I will not suffocate you," but the actual embodied repeated experience of closeness that consistently delivers expansion rather than contraction. That consistently leaves them more themselves rather than less. That consistently demonstrates, through the quality of presence you bring and the absence of demand you maintain, and the fullness of your own life that never requires theirs to complete it, that two people can be genuinely close and genuinely free simultaneously.